Hi, it's Jo from Minerva. Today we're going to make some male accessories for prom wear, bridal wear, evening wear, and that is going to be from Vogue 9073. It's a really good range of things on there, because sometimes you just get a waistcoat pattern, but this is a dinner waistcoat. It hasn't got a back in it. I'll show you that in a minute. Bow tie. That's a hand-tied bow tie. There's a bow tie with a neckband on, a cummerbund, a tie with a little extra contrasting piece of fabric in. So there's a tie, a bow tie, a hand-tied bow tie, a cummerbund and a waistcoat. As you can imagine, with so many things on one pattern, the cutting pieces are huge in number, but you will decide which view you're going to make, and then there's a cutting list for each item so you can match up the numbers and find the pieces that you need. There are lots of different fabrics you can choose for this pattern. You could use a brocade for the waistcoat, you could use a silk. If you use a silk, that's quite good for the hand bow tie or the one with the band on, but you won't be able to make the hand tie bow tie with the fabric I'm using today because it will be too thick. I'm using a Duchess satin. It's got a really nice luxurious evening wear feel, but it is quite thick. It's not very fluid. It's got a fluid look because of the shine on it, but it's quite a firm fabric because I want to make the cummerbund with really nice pleats in. All of the items that I use today are listed below, so you can take a look at the different colour variations in the satin. There's lots and lots of different colours to match with different evening wear sets. There is a bow tie fastening, some self-cover buttons, some sewing interfacing. If you've not used sewing interfacing before because you've always ironed it on, then I'll show you how to use that today. The key to making small accessory items like this is to be really, really accurate when you cut out. So you need to be cutting out and pinning right on the edges. If you put a pin in satin, you do get little pin marks in it, so you need to try and put your pins in the selvages. You could try silk pins as well. They're a bit finer and this is quite a thick fabric, but you could experiment with how not to get marks in your fabric. The other thing to remember when you're making really small accessories like this is to mark all of the markings in it. And actually for my first sewing session, I didn't even get the sewing machine out because there was lots of cutting accurately, marking, putting on basting lines, adding the sew on interfacing. I didn't get to do one line on the machine until a couple of hours into the sew. first part of the pattern is to work on the pleated part of the cummerbund, and it calls for a sew-on interfacing, and the reason for that is if we use an iron-on interfacing, then we might get some bubbling on the shiny side, and also the pleats on a cummerbund are quite soft pleats, so we just want that iron-on interfacing to sort of fill the pleat gap, not press it down flat. On my cutting, I just left the ends a little bit short because then I can see where all my markings are, because I don't really want to mark on the right side of my fabric. So I've marked all the lines on the wrong side. Obviously I'm going to cover them up now with interfacing, but I can still see the ends. And I'm going to remark the pleat lines now on the sew-on interfacing. I'm trying to remember, I don't always, but I'm trying to remember to pin really close to the edges because I don't want lots of pin marks coming through onto the satiny side of the fabric. Okay, so now I'm going to because I can see the ends, I'm going to remark my pleat lines. And do quite a lot of hand basting, and that's what this pattern is all about the markings. You hold the sew-on interfacing by tacking along the tack lines. So I'm using a little bit on the end so that I can see. I redrew it on with my chalk and ruler. You're going to do that on every line, and you can't skip it, because if you skip it you won't have even pleats on the front of your cummerbund. So just keep basting along the lines. If you've got a very long machine based setting on your machine, you can do that. I haven't, so I'm just going to tack along there and then start the next one. So there's plenty of prep. I've put my interfacing onto my side panels, onto my ties that go on the back. This is the pleated front that I've tried to be really accurate with, and this is my cummerbund lining. I could have cut this out of lining fabric, but I did have enough of the satin, so I thought I'd rather use that. But there's lining in the kit and it's listed below if you are making lots of things on the pattern and you need to use some of the lining. So everything's attached and tacked, and now we're going to start working on the pleats. So here's the small dot, and I'm going to bring that to the large dot, and I can see that from the right side because I have the tack line, so you can see why all the markings are so critical now. And small dot to large dot, I'm going to bring that small dot up to the large dot and pin. And then I've got the rest of this to press in place. This one, pleat them up, and I should get 3 pleats all together. I'm going to try not to pin in the middle there because I don't want pinholes in the front of my cummerbund, so I'm going to use my fingers to do the pressing. And once you've done that pressing process, you'll see why you didn't use iron-on interfacing, because you would have ironed it on once and then you would have ironed it again to put the pleats in. So you're getting these beautiful pleats that are stiffened, but they haven't got any bubbly marks, and they're not, and they're still a little bit springy, which is what you want, because when the person puts it on, they will pull it tight. Next, the back belt pieces go on. I'm going to sew along the end. So we've been sewing and making for quite a while, and it's the first time that we need to use our sewing machine. So you could probably do your first session of sewing without even getting your sewing machine out, because there's all this tacking and cutting and preparing. So that you know you're getting this the right way up, you should have a notch at the top and the notch on your back belt piece. And this needs to be accurate because the lining piece has a particular shape that fits over the top. So make sure that you've got these back pieces the right way around. I've got a notch here, and that's going on this notch here. Next stage is to prepare the back belt pieces. Probably the easiest way to show you is using the markings on the pattern sheet. So one end has squares on, one end has buttonhole markings on, and there's 2 notches, and you're going to fold in half and leave the end with the squares on open and sew along the other end. So this is my fabric. Here's my button markings. These are my square markings. Here are my notches. I'm going to fold it in half, pin, just a couple of pins because I don't want marks on my back belt pieces. Just enough to hold it together. And I've also drawn on with my marker that I can use different colours with. So I put a blue marking on to show my seam line. I'm going to do that twice with this one as well, and then we're ready to attach those onto the cummerbund. If you've not used tube turners before, these are by Prim. They're absolutely fantastic, especially on a slippy fabric like this. You push the tube inside your tube, and then you use the stick to push the end into the tube. And it turns your tube inside out, and then you can either use the blunt end or the spiky end to push out the corners. It's absolutely perfect, this tool, for spaghetti straps. If you've actually avoided a pattern because you know that you can't turn the strap out properly, this is perfect. You can really work the corners out so that they're really nice and smart, because that's going to be seen on the back. And then press this, and one side will have the button holes marked on and the buttons will be marked on the other one. Once you've made the straps, I'm going to match them up to the symbols. So there's 2 crosses or 2 dots or however you marked it, and then your strap goes in the middle. You can machine baste those or you can hand tack those down. I'm going to machine baste them because I'm going to put a label in here. I'm going to put a label in. They're by Kylie in the Machine. You'll find them if you search up hashtag KATM. It's lots of really good fun slogans. I'm going to use one, "You can't buy this," because I'm going to make this for a gift for somebody. And I'm going to put it on top of the strap so that when I put the facing on top and enclose everything, it will be at the back of the strap. So now it's time to enclose all of our work. And I'm going to leave a space at the bottom between here and here to turn it out. So this is the top and this is the bottom. The pleats on a cummerbund go up, so they're closed at the bottom and they're open on the top. I don't need to finish this off necessarily on the inside, but just because it's a Duchess satin, I'm just going to trim this seam out with pinking shears so that it doesn't fray on the inside and it'll have a nice long life. And take out some of that bulk off the end before I turn it. I've got my turning part here. I don't want to trim that down because I don't want that to be too short for turning. I'm going to hand sew that. So it's time to turn it inside out. And this is where it's a good idea to have left all the tacking in, because you're going to sort of roll it around a little bit to get it out. So you would spoil your pleats if you didn't keep the tacking in place. Give it another press in a minute. There should be a few little threads to pull and a bit of tacking to pull out. A little bit of fabric handling to deal with. Press those in. I'm not going to pin it because that would get me pin marks on the outside. I'm going to give it a press and then hand sew up the point of entry and take out all of the tacking stitches that you can see that you used as a guide. And there's my little label there, look. This one says, "You can't buy this." Going to cover the buttons. These are 11mm self-cover buttons and they're quite fiddly because they're so small, but on hemline patterns on the back of the packet is a little template, so you can use the template on the back to cut out your fabric. You can put it on and draw around it, and that's giving enough fabric to pull up into the self-covering button. You need to put a running stitch around here so that when you put the button in the centre you can draw up the excess to clamp behind. So you do a little running stitch around the edge of your fabric and then drop the dome side in, draw up the threads and do a few stitches side to side. Now you want to try and get your fabric to hook onto the teeth. So if you've got good thumbnails, that helps. And then you put the back on. It's got a raised ring, and the raised ring goes face down. And then you snap it shut. If you don't think you've got the dexterity to do that, and I totally understand that, then you could just buy some coordinating buttons or some little buttons. If it's going to be worn with a black suit, you can put little black buttons. You can actually buy satin covered ones as well. Next, make your buttonholes. Always practice on a scrap piece, because different fabrics go through the feed dogs at different rates. So you want to make sure that it's not slipping too much, or it's not gripping the feed dogs too much. So I've got quite a bad one, so I'm glad I didn't get that one as my first one. Let the fabric go through on its own, don't pull it through, and you should be okay on this band, because you've got some stiffener in the background, so you should get quite a good buttonhole on there. You need 3 buttonholes. When you cut the bow tie pieces out, it's really important to look for the grain line, so you don't cut them out like this with it on the grain. You need to slant them, and if you do that, it means you'll get a much smoother bow, because the weave of the fabric is able to stretch and gather. So make sure you cut those on the grain line specified, and then you'll need to do that same meticulous marking out of where the fold lines are, like we have on the cummerbund, and you'll need the necktie as well. You'll also need a small piece to make the knot around the centre. For the bow tie, the pattern suggests interfacing the pieces, but I know my Duchess satin is nice and springy, so I'm not going to interface those, the bits that make the bow tie, but I am going to interface the strap, because I'm going to, I want it to sit on the winged collar without it folding over. You're going to fold in the fold lines along the long edges, and then you'll have your marks here to fold in to the centre, and then you're going to sew along that centre, so you'll make a really neat bow, and with those ends, raw edges overlapping at the back. Make sure it's bang on centre. And prepare the upper and lower bow exactly the same. So I'm going to go and fold these ends in. I've got notches marking the lines, and again the other way, and base the centre. When you've tacked along the centre, you're going to draw up the basting threads. And then wrap the thread around the bow. You can get your pleats neat, and you've got the same for the second bow, the upper bow, and then you can wrap around both and secure at the back with the thread. To complete the bow, you make the little knot band, and that goes over the top of all of your raw edges, and you fold them over at the back and sew them down. Don't make it too tight, because your band is going to go through that back piece. Okay, the bow's finished, and as you can see, I didn't interface that, and it's plenty stiff enough. It would be a little bit clown-like if I had interfacing in there, but if you are using a taffeta or a silk, then you might need to use interfacing in your bow tie. I am preparing the neckband. So I've folded along the fold lines and folded the neckband in half and pressed it. I'm just using clips, just because I'm using satin and I don't want to have pin marks in it, but I need to make sure that the buckle part of my bow tie fastenings fits over the neckband. So now's the time to adjust that before I sew. So this little buckle has got to go through here. I'm going to double check that before I sew all the way along. I am getting a little bit of a crease in there, so I might just take some of my seam allowance off so that I know it will fit absolutely flushly through that buckle. The bow tie kit has a slider in it, but unfortunately I can't get it through this Duchess satin because it's so thick. So I can just about get the slider on, but it's so tight it's not sliding up and down, and then I've got to feed the fabric back through the buckle and I can't do that. So it's not a mystery to me who I'm making this for, so I just measured their neck. I used the other nice parts of the bow kit, which is the little hook and the circle, folded the ends under, and then you push the band through the back of the bow, and then it attaches at the back. So at the back of your winged collar you've just got this nice smooth finish. You wouldn't think there's a lot I could tell you about hemming a handkerchief, but this pattern suggests turning the 6mm hem, which I've done and ironed it down, and trimming it. But I know that if I trim that with a 6, if I sew and then trim it back, because I've got a satin, it's just going to fray. So I'm going to sew around there now, and then I'm going to turn it again, and I'll show you how to turn the corner. Right, on this first pass where I'm just folding the end under, I'm going to show you the problem that you might encounter. So you'll get to the corner and you've got it folded over, and then you pivot, and because you've got such a narrow hem, none of your fabric is touching the feed dogs on this side. So when you try to go down here, it's not moving anywhere, it's just doing a stitch on its end. So I get my unpicker and I'm just going to slide it behind the needle because I don't want the needle to hit the unpicker, and I'm using that spike to just stab the fabric from behind and pull it along, because once this feed dog on this side is feeding it through, then it will carry on then. It's just when you first put it under, there's nothing at the back feeding it through. This feed dog here, you can see, has got nothing touching it because it's only touching this side. So there's nothing moving the fabric through, so it just stays on the end and goes up and down. It's a really good technique if you're making napkins, if you're making tablecloths, and you think you're doing a super accurate job, and then you get to the corner and you get these sort of knotty corners. So we're going to do that on the second pass as well. So the pattern recommends sewing close to the edge like this and then trimming out this seam right up close. But I just know it's going to fray. It's fraying here. It depends what fabric you've got. If you've got a cotton, you can probably do that. But I know with this satin, I'm just going to get lots of fraying bits. So I'm going to turn it again, and I'm going to follow the line of stitching that I've already made. So I'll have one line of stitching showing from the right side, and I'll have one hopefully from the reverse, but it doesn't matter if it quite goes off it because it's on the back. But I can keep that really accurate by following the line of the stitching. Again, I'm going to get to these corners, and because I've got a bit of a chunky bit of fabric now on that corner, I can just use my tool to just grab the end and pull it through when I get to the corner. thanks very much for watching. I hope that's given you a little bit of inspiration for men's accessories around prom time, bridal time, because quite often we see lots of ladies wear, and I love this pattern because it's got such a range of items. If you've made any items from Vogue 9073, then we'd love to see them, so don't forget to post up your makes and tag the pattern number. If you've made any other men's clothes or men's accessories that you think might be useful for our customers, then please put those up too. See you again soon.